Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1980 and 1981, respectively, as we take a look at the first two records by British post-punksters, the Vapors. Now, the Vapors formed in Surrey, England in 1978. Early on in the band's career, in 1979, they were discovered by Jam bassist Bruce Foxton, who, along with Paul Weller's father, John, would eventually end up managing the Vapors, at least for a short period of time. This allotted the Vapors the opportunity to open for the Jam on their 1979 Setting Suns tour. Later that year, the band would release their first single, Prisoners. And in May of 1980, the band would eventually release their first LP, New Clear Days. Now for me, this is a band my personal relationship with began, of course, the first time I heard their hit single, Turning Japanese. I would imagine it was either on MTV when I was a young kid, or perhaps back in the days when commercial radio was still worth a squirt of piss. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, this is a band that has sort of been relegated and filed away as another one of those 80s one-hit wonders. Now, that isn't something that I necessarily agree with. In fact, I would make the statement that I don't agree with that assessment. This is a band that, although they did have a relatively brief run in their 1.0 era, this was a band that, over the course of just a couple of albums, managed to put out a lot of quality and memorable music. I mentioned the same thing about a month or so ago when I was reviewing the new record by another one of my favorite bands from that era, Modern English. Modern English are another one of those bands that I think have been sort of unfairly dismissed as another one of those 80s one-hit wonders. Now for me, Modern English is one of my favorite bands of all time. Certainly one of my favorite 80s bands of all time. If you use the term 80s as a genre, I think Modern English are probably one of the most underrated bands of their era. That being said, however, if you accept the fact that the Vapors are a one-hit wonder, if you accept that as being factual, the song Turning Japanese is a song that I still love as much today as the first time I ever heard it. This is a song that I never get tired of. And there are a few songs like that from some of those artists from that era that I feel the same way about. I never get tired of hearing Cars by Gary Newman. I just mentioned Modern English a second ago. I never get tired of hearing their song, I Melt With You. I mean, that is still one of my favorite songs of all time. Now, that being said, on the other side of that spectrum, there are certainly songs of that era that I would like to never hear again. The biggest one that comes to mind for me is the song Whip It by Devo. Now, I am a huge Devo fan, and I have been for a substantial period of time. Devo are one of my favorite bands to see live. In fact, Devo are getting ready to come back down here to Nashville in a couple of weeks to play the Ryman Auditorium on their 50th anniversary tour. But to me, I've never liked the song Whip It. It isn't very representative, to me at least, of their catalog. And mercifully, when you go see Devo live, and they play the song Whip It, they play the song Whip It at about triple tempo. Because I think it's fair enough to say that those guys are as sick of hearing that song as the rest of us. If I never heard the song Whip It ever again, I think that my life would be much better off than it is today. That being said, I don't agree that this band is a one-hit wonder. Like I said before, the band's 1.0 era was short-lived, but over the course of two records, this band managed to make a lot of quality music. I love the songs on both of these records. My favorite era of music is that window sort of in between 1977 and 1984, and I think that the Vapors are as good as many of the bands of that era. Not all, but as good as many of the bands of that era. I think that they fit, right in there. If I've heard one complaint by people who are in the know of the Vapors, that I do think at times is sort of a valid, complaint. It is that this band does tend to sound a little bit, too much like the Jam. Perhaps that was what first tickled Bruce Foxton's fancy when he discovered this band in 1979. I would agree that, yes, this band definitely has a little bit of Jam influence, perhaps a lot of Jam influence. But I do think that there are other elements that come into this band. There's certainly some early XTC. There's definitely a lot of Clash, some Generation X, a lot of David Bowie, of course. But, yeah, I would say that there is a fair amount of Jam Paul Weller influence, especially when you go back and you listen to these records and you listen to David Fenton's vocals. Now, David Fenton is one of my favorite singers from this era, but he definitely has a Paul Weller influence on his voice. You could make the argument that Paul Weller was a big influence on David Fenton's haircut and fashion sense as well. Now, for me, I'm not really complaining when it comes to the Paul Weller Jam influence over the Vapors, because to me, the Jam are easily my top 5 favorite bands of all time, and to me, the Jam are the greatest punk rock band of all time. So if the Vapors are guilty of being a little bit Paul Weller / Jam worshipy, I think that there are certainly worse traits than a band can have. Now, the first time I ever owned anything by the Vapors, of course, was on a compilation CD. I picked up, I think it was one of those Living in Oblivion CDs that were very popular back in the sort of early to mid 1990s. I was actually at one of my used record / CD stores here a couple days ago, and I was sort of thumbing through the compilation CD bin, and I stumbled upon a couple of those old Living in Oblivions. And man, I used to love those things. Every time those would come out, I'd always pick up the newest one. But I do believe that was the first time, I ever owned anything by the Vapors. And for me, it was a thing where I would pick up a compilation CD. I still do this when I'm sort of getting into a new style of music that I'm not as familiar with. I'll pick up a compilation and kind of listen through it. And, if there's something on it that I really like, a lot of times that'll sort of serve as, testing grounds whether or not I want to actually go out and buy or check out an album, an entire album by an artist. And I do remember hearing the song off that compilation, Turning Japanese. And of course it was a song that I was familiar with, but for, when I was a kid, I remember hearing it on this compilation. I was like, oh man, I remember this song. What was that band called again? And of course, I've always loved the song Turning Japanese. So the first time I actually owned this record was on CD. I remember I bought this CD used at my local record store, my hometown of Chico, California record store. I've mentioned before on this channel, my favorite record store of all time, probably just out of a sense of nostalgia, but a record store called The Underground. I bought this record on CD. I took it home and immediately was not disappointed by it. To me, this is an essential record for anybody's record collection, especially if you're into the sort of style of music that I'm into. Like I said, that window between 1977 and 1984, to me, this is as good as any other record from that era that I can think of. This record was released in May of 1980. It was produced by Vic Coppersmith Heaven. Of course, it's got nice band pics on the back. I've always loved this album cover. Of course, now it looks, I don't know that it really looks dated. I don't think dated is the right word, but it certainly looks very like late 70s, early 80s. This particular copy I picked up at a used vinyl shop several years ago, and apparently this particular copy was owned by somebody named Mona. Now, whoever Mona is today, I'd like to thank her for taking such nice care of my copy, because I would imagine that this particular copy is going to be with me until the day when I purchase the farm, which I'm sure for you is a day that can't come soon enough. All right, anyway, this record starts. The first song on side one, of course, is the band's best known one hit. If you are so cynical as to assign this band as being a one-hit wonder, to me, singer David Fenton, I saw an interview where he was asked about the status of this song and the status of the Vapors as being considered a one-hit wonder. And, he retorted back with something I thought was a good answer to it, and that was, I'd rather be a one-hit wonder than a no-hit wonder. Again, I am going to totally dismiss the idea of this band being a one-hit wonder. I absolutely love this song. Of course, this was the first song I ever heard of theirs. Now, for many years, many years, in fact, there was sort of urban legend and folklore about this song, that the song was about masturbation and turning Japanese in reference to the face you make just as you are about to finish this act. Now, this was something when I first discovered this little trick, I realized that it's true what they say, that is that the best things in life are free. I remember the first time I mastered this activity and pretty much completely changed my life. I thought, this is the greatest day of my life. It pretty much altered the trajectory of the second half of my high school career. Now, I think I've mentioned to you on these videos in the past, and I'm sure that you can imagine without too much difficulty, that I was a total nerd in high school. I basically had one friend, and he and I spent most of our time together. Apart from that, when he and I weren't together, I spent a lot of time hanging out in my bedroom, moping, sort of feeling sorry for myself. And at a certain point in time, my dad would call out to me and he'd say, hey, why don't you come hang out with the family? Why don't you just come out and be seen, and don't just spend all your time hanging out in your bedroom reading comic books and listening to music. And the second half of my career in high school was spent largely participating in this activity. And whenever my dad would bust my balls about coming out, spending time with the family, hanging out in the living room, let's watch a movie together, whatever, I would sort of chuckle to myself and think, you know what? I don't think you necessarily want me doing this in the living room. So if you don't mind, I will just sort of hide back in my bedroom and I will take care of business. Now, for me, I became kind of girl crazy, I think at a relatively young age, although it's hard to tell because everybody is probably, develops at reasonably the same amount of time. But for me, I remember the first, sort of female celebrity crush, or at least the first celebrity that ever kind of caught my eye, was the singer Tiffany. Now, this was sort of right around the time I was either at the end of grammar school or perhaps middle school when she was a big thing. And I remember seeing her video on MTV and I was like, I don't mind looking at that. The next female celebrity that really caught my eye, actually my wife and I, just earlier today, were watching the movie Goonies. And for me, the second female celebrity that really made me feel extra macho, if you know what I mean, was Martha Plimpton. Now, there was a point in time when Martha Plimpton was dating River Phoenix. River Phoenix was somebody, by the way, that if you're of a certain age, River Phoenix was like one of our heroes as a kid, growing up in, the mid-'80s up into the early 90s. And I was a huge River Phoenix fan. But when I found out that he was dating Martha Plimpton, I don't mind telling you that I wanted to meet up with River Phoenix and exchange fisticuffs. But for me, when I was in high school, the whole thing changed. There was one person I would eventually see when I was in high school on the MTV that became my high school celebrity soulmate. That being Lisa Loeb. When I first saw her video for the song Stay. Now, for me, I was probably maybe a junior or senior in high school when that song was released, when the Reality Bites soundtrack came out. That was such a huge thing for people of my generation. Singles and Reality Bites and movies like that were such a huge thing. Now, personally, I would take Singles over Reality Bites every day. I think Singles is still probably one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. Not that I don't like Reality Bites. Reality Bites is good, but when I saw the video for Lisa Loeb's Stay off of that soundtrack, I could literally feel my mouth gaping open. To me, that was like female perfection personified. And I don't mind telling you that I spent the next year or so of my life perhaps abusing myself thinking about that video. Many years later, I actually went to go see Lisa Loeb with a coworker of mine when she came to Seattle. Now, apart from the song Stay, I didn't know anything about Lisa Loeb's music. I wasn't particularly interested in the song, if you know what I mean. But we went to go see Lisa Loeb, and I gotta be honest with you, her music isn't really my luggage, and her live show wasn't anything that was very memorable either. But I do remember standing in that crowd. This was a place in Seattle called the Tractor Tavern, one of my favorite venues of all time. And I remember standing there watching her, and I felt weird being there because of how much I was in love with her as a high school junior and senior. I stood there, I felt creepy even watching the show, which the show wasn't even very good. My wife and I have this sort of arrangement, a lot of couples probably do, where you can have this sort of fantasy three who, if the opportunity ever allots itself, you could get away with without it constituting a cheat. And I'm not sure if I have 3 on my list right now, but my top 2 are still Lisa Loeb and Martha Plimpton. Number 3, I don't know, probably be Elizabeth Daily. I don't know if you remember her from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Ooh, man, I was a fan of hers. Anyway, having said all that, this song isn't even about that topic. This song is basically a love song, pining over the picture of an ex-girlfriend. Singer David Fenton talked about one time in an interview I saw how he had the song basically written, but he was having a really hard time coming up with a chorus. At some point, eventually, the chorus, turning Japanese, just sort of popped into his head. And as I mentioned before, considering this is one of those one-hit wonder songs that it really isn't, in my opinion, this is a song I still love. It's a song that I never get tired of. And as David Fenton said, I'd rather be a one-hit wonder than a no-hit wonder. And if you have to be a one-hit wonder, if this band is that, you could definitely do a lot worse than turning Japanese, at least in my opinion. The second song on side 1 is a song called 60 Second Interval. Another song that could pretty accurately describe my sexual prowess. Or as I refer to it, the old 3 pumps and an apology. This is a great song to me, as I mentioned before. One of the criticisms people have of this band is that they are a little bit too much like the Jam, Paul Weller. To me, this is a great song. To me, this song actually has a lot more of kind of an XTC vibe. I'm not exactly sure what this song is about. Every time I listen to this song, I picture this song being about something. Perhaps this is me growing up in the Bay Area, but I always think of this song as kind of like an earthquake, because the song kind of starts off talking about how you're waiting for this incident. You're sort of sitting around, you're bored, and then you have 60 seconds of chaos, and then after that, it just sort of dissipates. And growing up in the Bay Area, perhaps being a northern Californian, I just sort of picture that as being earthquakes, because that's something that, being from Northern California, you just kind of get used to. That's kind of how it is when one hits. You're sitting around doing nothing. All of a sudden, the ground is literally shaking out from underneath you, and less than a minute later, you kind of go back to your normal life. The third song on this record is a song called Waiting for the Weekend. Much better than the Loverboy song Working for the Weekend, just to let you know. To me, this song is sort of the idea I get in this song is, it's kind of like missing your spouse during your work day. It talks about how you have 9 hours where you aren't going to be together. It talks about, waiting at the train station, waiting for your significant other to meet you at the train station either after a day of work, or it also sort of makes reference to in the song House. Could be kind of like a long distance situation, so you see each other on the weekends, but you during the week you take the train back and forth to where you live. This song always makes me think of my wife. Of course, my wife and I have been together for a very long time, but I still miss her every day at work. We still are in that state of our life 12 years into our relationship, or whatever it is, where we still like to send each other nice, affirming text messages throughout the day to let each other know that we are thinking of the other. And it always makes me think of this song. I love the song Waiting for the Weekend. After that is a song called Spring Collection. I really love this song. I'm not exactly sure who the girl is in this song, but I love the way lyrically that the girl in this song is described. She's very sort of late 70s, early 1980s, post-punk, punk rock, new wave girl. I sort of picture this song being written through the perspective of a kid who is a little bit maybe unfashionable, a little bit on the nerdier side, and he sees this girl from across his school or across perhaps his workplace who is just it. She's just got everything. She's got the looks, she's got the style, she's got the confidence, she's got the swagger, she's got the threads, and she's just basically what you sort of imagine as being perfect. And you're sort of this schlubby, nerdy person who has really no reasonable, there's no reason for you to go even try to approach her. I love the way that this girl is described in this song. I sort of like the way that the narrator describes himself. Somebody told me one time that they thought that this song was sort of creepy, like this was an adult male, eyeing on a teenage girl. Now, I don't necessarily get that vibe from the song. Like I said, I feel like this is more of a kind of a nerdy guy who just sees this girl, from across the room. The next song after that ends side one. This is a song called Letter from Hero. Now, this is a total jam Paul Weller sounding song. It has one of my favorite lyrics on the entire album, which is "The age of reason is out to lunch." To me, this song is, well, it's not to me. I've read an interview with David Fenton who's talking about how this song is the powerlessness a young man feels when the inevitability of World War II is about to kick off. This song takes place in 1938. Hiro is the narrator's Japanese pen pal. This person is afraid that they are going to lose their pen pal to military service. He talks about how Hiro cares much more for his flag than he does about him. I really love this song. It's dark. I love the World War II reference. That's something that I love reading and studying about in my free time, as anything to do with World War II. Side 2 starts off with a song called News at 10. Again, another song very heavily influenced by the Jam. Paul Weller. This is about a young man's disdain, not so much towards his father, but sort of his father's complacency. You get the feeling that this is a very young, idealistic, politically minded kid, and his dad is sort of content to sit in front of the television watching football or the Merv Griffin show or something like that. This always reminds me of my generation in a way. This song reminds me of my generation. My parents were sort of on the tail end of the Vietnam generation. My grandparents on both sides of my family were sort of World War II generation, and I came up in Generation X. And Generation X, at least when I was in high school and college age, Generation X, our biggest criticism among our older peer groups was that as a generation, we were too complacent. We were just sort of the meh generation. And for me, honestly, I don't know how well I fit in with all of these sort of stereotypes of Generation X, but for me, politically and kind of the way I interact with my fellow man out in the world, I'm not necessarily too far off from that. I am not a very political person. I am not a super social person. I don't necessarily follow what's going on around the world, and I think it was interesting because I think for a lot of people who were my parents' age, at least people who were, like I said, they grew up, during Vietnam and the civil rights, and there was all of these things to really go out and care about and protest and talk about. I think a lot of them could not understand the complacency of the Generation Xers. I mean, to us, the biggest tragedy to befall our generation was the day that Kurt Cobain decided he couldn't cope anymore and took himself out. So, to me, this song always kind of makes me think of growing up as Generation X and feeling that sort of weird judgment from the boomers and the World War II crowd. The next song after that is a song called Somehow. To me, this song I really love this song for one thing, but it feels like the reflections you go through sort of as a relationship is just freshly over. You sit down and you kind of take inventory of yourself. What happened? Where did it go wrong? What did I do? How did they not meet my expectations? How can I make the next situation not end up as poorly? This is a situation I've been in many times. I feel like every time in the past I went through a relationship that didn't work out, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to be different next time. I'm going to be perfect. I won't even be the same person that I am now. It's always sort of it's always kind of a admirable idea, but at the end of the day, our real personalities eventually leak through when we try, because every relationship starts off, at least in my experience, starts off with this, somebody being on their best behavior for at least the first few months, and then you start to see the little drips come through. And but I really like this song. What did I learn? What does it all mean? Is it worth it in the end? I really love this song. The next song after that is the band's first single, a song called Prisoners. I really love this song. I would make the argument that Prisoners is one of my favorite songs on this album. Now, interestingly enough, at least in my opinion, if you go to check out this record on Spotify, the song Prisoners is not on this album on Spotify. On Spotify, it is replaced by a song called America, which does not appear on this physically formatted copy of the record. So I'm not exactly sure why that is. I love the song Prisoners, but if you're going to check it out on either Spotify or Apple Music, it isn't on the record. I don't know the reason why that is. I tried to research it, and I couldn't find anything about it. The next song after that is a song called Trains. I really love this song. This is another sort of gut-wrenching, pining for either your current or your ex. This talks about dropping somebody off at the station. The way I interpret this song is you drop them off at the train station for the last time. You've basically just decided to split up, and you at least have the courtesy to drive her to the train station and make sure she gets on her train safely. The song later talks about perhaps going to the train station and just sort of standing there because this is the place where you used to pick her up, hoping knowing intellectually it won't happen, but hoping emotionally that you'll see her drop off the train, and she will be there, and she will run and throw herself into your arms the way that she used to do. This album closes out with a song called Bunkers. To me, this is a song at the beginning of the song, it talks about how you grew up in a very small town, but you were excited to move. You grew up in the country, but you're excited to move downtown. And for me, that's something that I can totally relate to. I grew up in a very small town in the mountains of Northern California. After a brief failed academic career going to college, I decided to drop out and move myself and my first real girlfriend I ever had down to an urban setting, something that I was just absolutely excited about. I had lost interest in going to school. I wanted to sort of get on with my life, pursue things that I could not find in my hometown. So to me, that part of the song is very relatable. This song talks about, government thugs keep me in for the week, call the cops if I'm out on the street. To me, it sort of reminds me a little bit of COVID. To me, this is a little bit of a prophetic song in 1980, because the lyrics talking about sort of being forced to be shut in and having people call the cops if they see you out on the street. It paints an image to me of COVID. Obviously, it wasn't a thing in 1980, but that closes out the band's first record, Nuclear Days. Like I said, that is still one of my favorite records from that era. In March of 1981, the band would release their second album, Magnets. This record was produced by David Tickle, and of course it features this iconic album cover by Martin Hanford, who would eventually go on to create I don't know if it's a cartoon strip or books or however you want to describe it, Where's Wally in the UK. Over here in the US, we know it as Where's Waldo. In fact, I remember the first time I actually owned this album, I was already aware of Where's Waldo, because this was a record that I kind of went out and I bought later on after having Clear New Days for a long time. I found Magnets, I think, in a CD store for like $1 used one time. So I picked it up, and I remember thinking, like, wow, this really looks like one of those Where's Waldo books. And the more I looked at it, the more I kind of realized, even before I had to look it up, that I was like, I bet it's the same artist. Of course, this is a very dark illustration. This portrays some sort of an assassination. The victim is down here, surrounded by 3 police cars and a ring of police officers. There is also a ring of paramedics. Now, I don't understand how the paramedics are supposed to get through this in to help the victims, unless it's already too late for the victims, which, if you look closely enough, there is certainly a fair amount of blood. And they're either loading or unloading gurneys into some of these ambulances. Now, if they are loading them in, it looks as if this person didn't make it, because it looks as if the body bag is closed. Now, it could be a gurney that is prepared to take on, it could be an empty gurney prepared to take on a victim. And if you look up here, where is he? It's on this side. If you look up here, here is the suspect and his assault rifle. You would imagine he's got his little case here. He's done his deed, and he is probably packing himself up, hoping to escape. You don't imagine this being one of those guys who's either going to take himself out or commit suicide by cop. On the back cover, you have what I assume is either later that same night or perhaps the next day. The police are here, and they've got their headlights flashed on what is some sort of case. Now, I'm not sure if it's the gun case or something, but it's something that I imagine the suspect has left behind. Perhaps he's one of those who wants, notoriety. He doesn't necessarily want to be apprehended, but he wants at least some sort of notoriety. This is one of those record covers that I could literally spend hours looking at, because one of the things, and I'm a fan also of the Where's Waldo books or comic strip or however you want to describe it, because of all the little, people, all the little detail in the artwork. Everybody's sort of doing something else. People are waving to each other. Some people are protecting people, from the chaos. But I love this album cover. This is one of my favorite album covers, maybe ever, but certainly from this era. Now, for me, this record, Magnets, it isn't quite as good as Clear New Days, which I love Clear New Days, and I like this record a lot too. But to me, it's just not quite as good. It is dark. I think it's probably actually even a little bit darker than Clear New Days. But the first song on this record is a song called Jimmy Jones. Of course, this song was written about American cult leader Jim Jones, who died on November 18th, 1978, along with 917 of his followers, 304 of which, I had to look this up recently, 304 of which were either minors or under the age of 18, of course, in Jonestown, Guyana. Now, this song is incredibly well written. This song is sort of told, the narrator in this song is somebody who you get the feeling is leaving their life here, leaving their family here, and getting ready to travel to Jonestown. And the way that they just talk about the lyrics in the song are written to the point where you believe that this is one of the people, this is one of the 917 people, apart from Jim Jones himself, who died on November 18th, 1978, because the narrator in this song is just a die-hard believer. They completely believe in Jim Jones. They have no questions as to why they are following him down to Guyana, and man, it's just really depressing song. I believe Jimmy Jones was the first single off of the record, Magnets. Now, as I said before, this record is just not quite as good as Clear New Days. I don't understand how this record didn't at least have, maybe not a song that was quite as successful as, Turning Japanese, but man, this record has got some jugs on it. The next song after that is a song called Spiders. I love the intro on this song. This song is about, I interpret this song as being sort of about depression, or at least some other type of harmful mental illness. The spiders they talk about are living in the girl's brain. That's one thing, about the world we live in now compared to probably 1981. And I don't know that I would necessarily take today's world over 1981 in most capacities. But one thing I am very grateful for, as somebody who suffers from bouts of depression, is the fact that the stigma surrounding things like depression and mental health and things like that are sort of falling along the wayside. I really love this song, Spiders. It's really dark. The next song after that is a song called Isolated Case. To me, this song kind of represents the ugly side of politics, the ego and self-delusionment of politicians, and sort of the absurdity of oppressive laws. We are in the midst of election season down here in the United States, something that I don't usually participate in. I'm somebody who doesn't tend to vote. I don't necessarily follow politics very closely, but the way that they describe the politicians in this song is pretty much exactly the way I see politicians in general, which is why I choose typically not to participate in the voting process, especially in this country, especially right now. If you look at in terms of just the big election, I mean, I'm relatively new to Tennessee, and I'm not interested enough to even probably be able to tell you on a state level, apart from our governor, who are the people who even run this state. So I'll just sort of focus on the big election, which is our presidential election in November. I mean, if you could find two more reprehensible human beings than Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you should be given a free Cadillac, because both of these guys are just disgusting human beings, and how anybody could support either one of them is beyond me. Now, I accept the fact that, well, I don't really accept the fact, but I understand the fact that in this country, a lot of times your options are reduced to the lesser of two evils. But I don't even know if there's a lesser of two when it comes to these guys. The next song after that is a song called Civic Hall. To me, this song is very heavily David Bowie influenced, all the way down to the vocals. I feel like David Fenton's vocals on this song almost sound spot on like David Bowie. This song tells the story of an assault suffered by David Fenton at the hands of a metropolitan police officer. Now, you don't really have to wonder, if you listen to this song and you go back and you read the lyrics, you don't necessarily have to wonder what happened, because the song lyrically is very matter of fact. The song basically reads out like a police report. It basically tells you exactly what happened and how it happened. And I think the song is incredibly well written. Like I said, it's got a real David Bowie vibe to it. To me, I mean, this is a song that, although it's maybe not the catchiest song in the world, because it is sort of very matter of fact, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. This is a song I can't understand why it at least didn't become more popular. Side 1 ends with a song called Live at the Marquee. This is a song I really like as well. To me, this song has kind of an early sort of U2 influence, especially with the sort of big, echoey, reverby guitar. Side 2 starts with a song called Daylight Titans. To me, this song, again, this is another song. It has a really big, kind of bratty, reverby sort of guitar. To me, this song also kind of sounds like an early U2 song. And I like early U2. I'm not saying that as to be dismissive or to, throw hands. I mean, to me, U2 is a band that I'm a casual fan of. My best friend Tim in California is the biggest U2 geek of all time, which is awesome. But, U2 is a band that I like. I'm not the biggest fan in the world, but my favorite era of the band is their first two records, Boy and October. And to me, the song Daylight Titans is a song that, to me, could, sonically at least, it could be a song that is on either Boy or October by U2. Now, the vocals, of course, are different because David Fenton doesn't have a voice that sounds anything like Bono, but sonically, to me, this one sounds like early U2. The next song after that is Johnny's in Love Again. To me, this song has kind of an early, has kind of an XTC meets David Bowie meets early U2 kind of vibe. I mean, this song is pretty dark, pretty disturbing. You get the feeling that Johnny is somebody who is on the brink of committing something that could be pretty heinous if you go back and you listen to the lyrics. This is another one of my favorite songs on the record, maybe even one of my favorite songs in their catalog. The next song after that is a song called Can't Talk Anymore. To me, this song it's about loneliness, it's about despair, it's about somebody who has feelings as if they are living on the fringes of society. It asks the question in the song, why was I ever born? It flirts with ideas of the narrator possibly being suicidal. I think it's very well written. Again, this record, I would make the argument Magnets is a lot darker than Clear New Day, and Can't Talk Anymore, might take the cake in terms of the darkness. maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's not, but to me, that is actually my favorite song on Magnets is Can't Talk Anymore. The next song after that is a song called La Nina. This song actually kind of has more of a punk sound to it, but kind of a punk meets early B-52s. I mean, this is just your good old-fashioned, stalking song about somebody who is just completely obsessive. My wife and I recently just watched the show that everybody seems to be talking about. I didn't know it was a big thing until I watched it, and then I started talking to people about it at my work, which is the show Baby Reindeer, which if you haven't seen, I really highly recommend it. It's a British show. I love British shows. I love, for one thing, I just love the setting, being that it's filmed and takes place in Britain. And the main character works in a British pub. I was telling my wife, as we were watching the show, I mean, one of my dream jobs, I've got about 3 or 4, one of my dream jobs of all time would be to work in a British pub. I realize I'm not setting my sights very high, but I mean, look at what you're working with here. I have to work within some semblance of reality. But if you haven't watched the show Baby Reindeer, I'd highly recommend it. This song kind of reminds me of it. This song kind of makes your skin crawl, makes you feel a little bit itchy. The next song after that is Silver Machines. This song is, again, probably heavily influenced by the Jam. I think it's got a pinch of XTC thrown in there as well, another band that I absolutely love. This is a great song. To me, this song, I think it tries to make sense of losing your spouse or somebody who's incredibly close to you. It's a very sort of sad song. My wife and I, almost 2 years ago, hard to imagine, it's almost been 2 years, but my wife and I went through a very substantial loss in our family a couple of years ago, and it's something that we still deal with every single day. Now, I don't want to go into a ton of detail with you right now as to who it was and how it happened, but it's something that has definitely left an indelible impression in our lives forever. It was a line of demarcation in our lives. This is something that you don't really ever get over. It's something that you sort of learn how to cope with. Now, this was something that was, I don't want to say bigger loss, but it was a more direct loss to my wife than it was to me. And I'm going to be honest with you, and I realize this probably sounds like I'm sucking ass, but I really can't help but just admire the way that she has tried her best to kind of get through this situation as best as anybody can. And the fact, like I just mentioned, it's been almost 2 years since we went through this loss is something that it seems like impossible that it's already been 2 years, and it seems impossible that it's only been 2 years. But it's something that we'll probably never get over all the way. This song, I think, articulates that very well. The last song on this record is the title track, Magnets. This was a song that was written about both Kennedy assassinations, both John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. This is a pretty dark record, so you may as well close it out with a relatively dark tune. I love the song Magnets. For me, it is a little bit long-winded. I think this song clocks in at like 7 or 8 minutes long. I've mentioned in the past it's not necessarily, my favorite thing in the world when songs go on for that long. I like the song Magnets a lot. I love this record. Like I said, it isn't quite as good as Clear New Day, which I think sets the bar pretty high. But if you haven't gone back and listened to the Vapors' second record, Magnets, I would highly recommend it. Not long after this record came out, the band ended their 1.0 era. By splitting up, David Fenton has said in interviews in the past, it wasn't necessarily anything to do with inner strife within the band. There were just a lot of sort of circumstances that were working against the band at the time. David Fenton made the decision also that he wanted to spend more time at home with his young family. He was committed to being a father. I don't know that had Magnets as a record, had it performed better, and if the band had had any more success like they experienced with the song Turning Japanese, I don't know that he necessarily would have quit the music industry, at least at that point in time. I can imagine, though, that, the second record came out. It basically didn't really do anything commercially. The band was dropped by the label, and they decided to call it quits. In 2020, the band put out I believe in 2016, the band reformed. In 2020, the band released an album called Together, which I don't own physically. It is a record that I have listened to a few times, and it is a record that I do like. It isn't necessarily as good as the first two records. It is an album that it has songs on it that I really like. To me, it has a little bit of clunkage. My wife, when the record came out, now she's not necessarily the biggest Vapors fan nor expert in the world, but I remember, I think the record came out during the shutdown. I remember listening to it in 2020 when it came out. I don't know if it was right during the shutdown or maybe right after, but I remember mentioning to my wife, I was like, oh, the Vapors put out a new record, and she was like, who are the Vapors? And I was like, oh, Turning Japanese. And she's like, yeah, who asked for that? And initially I was like, yeah, I guess, but if the record's good, I'm all in. And I thought the record turned out to be pretty good. Now, very recently, the Vapors have just released a new single. I want to give a shout out to one of my commenters on this channel, one of the ones who doesn't talk shit. His name is Dan Turek 8604. He asked that I mention the new single by the Vapors. The song is called Eyes on the Prize. So thank you so much, Dan, for giving me a pleasant comment, not having to sift through all the pile of negativity all the time that I'm forced to deal with over here. Now, this is a new song called Eyes on the Prize. This is a song that I do like a lot. David Fenton's voice, I would say, has aged remarkably well. He still sounds pretty much as if he did in 1980, 1981. I really do like this record. I'm hoping that it is leading up to a full-length album. Now, I should have researched enough to be able to answer that question, but I would like to hear another full-length record. And like I said before, the record Together, I don't own it on physical format, but if I were to stumble upon a CD or a record of it, I would like to have it just for a piece of the sort of library. But I really like the song Eyes on the Prize. To me, this song, there's a lyric that says, keep your eyes on the prize, forget about the neon lights. To me, this song is about staying true to yourself and not being distracted by all of the nonsensical bullshit going on around you. I really like the new song. If there is a new album coming out, and this song is any sort of indication as to what it'll sound like, I'm pretty optimistic. Like I said before, the 2020 record Together, it is on Spotify if you are interested in going back and checking it out. I don't think you'll be super disappointed in it if you are a fan of the Vapors, but for sure, you need to go back and check out the band's first two records. Like I said, New Clean Days, to me, it's an essential. You have to own this record. If you're a record collector, especially if you are a fan of the same window of music that I am, from like 1977 to 1984. And Magnets, although I would not argue that it's an essential, I'm not saying that people should show up at your house and cripple you with ball bats if you don't own Magnets, but I think it's a record that is definitely worth listening to and going back and revisiting. And I think you'll find at the end of the day that I am correct in my assessment that I don't necessarily think that this is a band that should be relegated to that sort of dismissed and filed away as being just one of those what-it wonders. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Jamie. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store. Check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of Morrissey and the Smiths. I realize I've been sort of neglecting the Morrissey Mondays over the past couple weeks. One should be coming down the pipe this week. I know you think that's pretty snug. As well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, talk to you then.